And it's politics and it's money and it's the dynamics of the entire situation, and something that certain people, just like we see political demographics that are diverse across state lines, I think the same is said for the death penalty. We have a lot of states that have outlawed the death penalty, and a lot of states that think it's the best thing, and certainly the inequity there is also an issue and also a concern for those of us who practice in capital litigation. The idea that somebody could commit the same crime in one state and not get the death penalty, but in another they could. So, it's certainly a disconcerting situation, I think.
And back to being on a case like that was, the part that the media, did you learn anything about certain media outlets and what they would do for a story? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Well, boy, I certainly shied away from the media myself. I didn't, as you know, I didn't talk to the media during the trial.
Nonchalant there. Nobody saw you. I think one appearance you were caught going to your car.
Going to my car, walking out of the jail, and that's kind of. I wouldn't say that was anything inappropriate, but it certainly speaks to the thirst that there was for information from these media outlets. So, we certainly see that when a case becomes so high profile, for whatever reasons, the thirst and quest for information is almost unending.
Absolutely. And I do see a lot of callers. Just hang on. We're going to go through some current events of the evening, and we will get to you. Okay, since we're in the football mood, let's talk about one, Johnny Manziel. But first, let's play this courtesy of ESPN2, and we'll talk on the other side.
Saturday morning, Fort Worth police issued a statement saying officers went to an apartment complex to investigate a report of a possible assault involving Browns quarterback Johnny Manziel. The officer spoke to a 23-year-old woman who said she was involved in a disturbance with her ex-boyfriend earlier that night in Dallas. Police didn't identify the woman, but said in a report that she was the victim. They did not say if she was hurt. She was uncooperative with officers and raised concerns about her ex-boyfriend's well-being. Police officers attempted to locate him, including by helicopter, and later determined that he was safe and not in danger. There have been no arrests. Skip, another Johnny story. What's your take?
Yeah. Stephen A., I know you get awfully tired of having to talk about Johnny Manziel, and I'm right there with you. But this story just gets worse and worse and worse. And I spoke last night to a couple of people I thought were close to Johnny Manziel. Both said they're no longer close to Johnny Manziel because he is now, for them, unreachable. And they meant literally, as in by phone, and figuratively unreachable, where they have reached out, tried to help, tried to counsel, said they're there for him, and now Johnny has gone off on his own, and as one of them told me, he doesn't even know who he is anymore. Wow. Both expressed out of a tough love sentiment that they hope Johnny Manziel is close to hitting absolute bottom. By that, they would mean getting cut by the Browns and having to realize that nobody else in the NFL wants him in his current state. That they would hope that form of hitting bottom would finally force Johnny Manziel to look in the mirror and maybe try to come to grips with all of his escalating issues. And as Molly just pointed out, the part of the call on Saturday night or early Sunday morning that jumped out to me was the woman who called said she feared for his well-being as well as her own. Mm-hmm. And that prompted, as Molly said, for police to go looking for Johnny, even having to deploy a helicopter to find Johnny Manziel. Wow. it has come to that. So, again, I still love the kid, and I'm just fearing that we're watching step by step the unraveling of Johnny Manziel that's going to wind up one of the great sports tragedies that we've witnessed from a player who went from Heisman Trophy and first-round pick to this. Your thoughts?
Okay, Kirk, definitely a tragedy from what this young man was in college, now on the verge of being cut by Cleveland. What's your thoughts on the pretty much the rise and fall of Johnny Manziel?
Well, I would say in terms of what we're calling the fall or the current fall, this domestic violence situation, I would think the rush to judgment is happening a little too hastily, in the sense that, there were some stories out early this afternoon that the ex-girlfriend was cracking under questioning or being inconsistent. She refused to have her injuries photographed, that sort of thing. So, and the fact that there's no arrest made in a domestic violence situation that has been described as so violent, to me, is somewhat telling that there may not be any evidence to support what Mr. Manziel is referred to as his ex-girlfriend. There may not be any support to what she's saying. There may be, but there may not. And I just think we have just a bit of too much a rush to judgment as it relates to this current situation.
But overall, he hasn't been leading up to what people expected it to be. Certainly being spotted in a bar in Vegas during the night before a game, things like that. He's definitely not a role model for sure at this point in the game.
Well,
agree, right?
there's no doubt about that. Certainly, earlier this afternoon I happened to catch an interview with Ryan Leaf, who had a similar, the most probably analogous tragedy that we can face. One of the top picks and going downward in pain pills and different medication, and really ruining his life and really hitting rock bottom in prison. And I hope, obviously, that Johnny Manziel is not headed that way, certainly. And, we have to, like I say, when I talk about this rush to judgment and tempering ourselves, you playing the football clips way back from the first Super Bowls and the days of Joe Namath, when you ask me this question, makes me think, I wonder how much similar stuff went on before the days of social media. How much happened before somebody could take a photograph and put it on Twitter? Did Joe Namath or Bart Starr, did they get away with similar stuff just because the scrutiny wasn't there?
Well, I heard stories like that of Mickey Mantle, that he was shot a beer prior to a bat. I see the ESPN Sports Center, they talk about things like that were different back in the day. So you do bring up a valid point.
Could you imagine if a baseball player today got caught drinking a beer before his at-bat? Could you imagine?
Well, David Wells was drunk the day that he pitched a no-hitter, according to his memoir.
Yes. Him and Doc Gooden was on LSD, right? Back
him and Darryl Strawberry were on a lot of things. The Saturday before and during the whole World Series, which was a crazy comeback, I believe, in one of those games. I was pretty young. I don't remember actually watching it, but I know from reading up on it and seeing the videotape of it, that Game 6, wow, they had it, the Red Sox. And I know you're a baseball fan, so I know you know what I'm talking about.
I am indeed, but that's the thing. When we hear these stories, when we think about these things, we have to think about what they got away with, and what they wouldn't get away with in today's modern era. And when we judge our athletes, I think, I just think consideration needs to be given in that regard.
Yes, I'm in my early 30s now, but 10 years ago, I did some crazy stuff that could actually go head-to-head with this football player. But, you know, if I was a football player, maybe I wouldn't act like that. My point is, in your 20s, you can make a lot more different mistakes than you would make in your late 20s or in your 30s. You know, I've done stuff 5, 6, 7 years ago that I would never do now. You know, so you learn when you get older.
Yeah, and you've got a young man in Mr. Menzel, who's, you know, and a lot of these athletes, they get a lot of money thrown at them. They're very young, and they don't know how to handle it. And there's the girls and everything else. So, you know, it breeds that sort of, what is this, debaucherous behavior, shall we say. So.
No question about it. Next, I wanted to talk to you about a very trending story indeed. We're talking about the near 80-year-old comedian by the name of Mr. Bill Cosby, as I look for the updated information on him. Of course, he is going to trial, and he went to trial yesterday to try to get the judge to throw out the case, and here's what happened, and we'll talk on the other side.
The criminal case against Bill Cosby is moving for trial after a judge today refused to dismiss the case. The defense had argued that they had an agreement with a former prosecutor that Cosby would never be charged over his 2004 encounter with a Temple University employee.
Yeah, I mean, look, the lesson would be, if you're Bill Cosby and if you truly think that you were a subject of a non-prosecution agreement, you get it in writing. But I don't think at the time he thought that.
Cosby hasn't shown too much emotion in court this week. He's been pretty steady, smiling at times with his attorneys, and even after the ruling came out, he appeared ready for it, prepared for it. Perhaps the defense knew that it was somewhat of an uphill battle. For the next step now, we proceed to the normal preliminary hearing. This hearing today had been done to make sure the case could even get to that stage, and Cosby, since he was arrested on December 30th, has not yet even entered a plea. In Pennsylvania, that comes after the preliminary evidence hearing, when a magistrate judge will determine whether there's enough evidence to move toward trial. He faces up to 10 years if convicted of the crime of indecent sexual assault. Of course, there's also damage to his reputation, and we now know that he has paid out money to this accuser in a civil settlement, and other women say that they were offered things like educational trusts and other kinds of money when they came forward with accusations. But again, this is the first case in which a prosecutor is ever taking it to trial.
Unbelievable set of circumstances in the Bill Cosby trial. Kirk, what do you make of this case? I mean, you got a 10-year-old case with some problems in terms of that it is from 2004. You have the prosecutor, the ex-prosecutor, trying to save Bill Cosby. A lot of odd things going on with this trial. What's your take on it?
Well, you know, they certainly do seem odd. It's certainly different. I'll tell you, my one take I have that stands out is the ruling by Judge O'Neill saying that the prosecution, the non-prosecution agreement isn't valid because it's in writing. I suspect that Mr. Cosby's lawyers will vigorously challenge that because, you know, when plea agreements and agreements are made, typically between prosecutors and defense attorneys, when there's much dispute, really, the rules of contract law tend to be what governs those disputes. And certainly, yes, it's always better to have a contract in writing, but oral contracts are binding in American jurisprudence. So this idea that, and I haven't had the opportunity to read the judge's ruling or what he relied on in terms of why it needed to be in writing, it's quite curious to me why he would make that ruling. And we're talking about Mr. Cosby, and on the basis of this agreement, essentially waiving his rights against self-incrimination, because in this deposition, he basically went forward and said that, yes, he did provide the girls with drugs. So you certainly have the basis for prosecution, and while there were problems back in 2005, problems with the victim's credibility,